10-Minute University is a program of the Clackamas Master Gardener Association, offered in collaboration with and in support of the OSU Extension Service Master Gardener program. At our website, you'll find handouts, videos, upcoming classes, and workshops. Our program is volunteer-led, and we are supported by the OSU faculty to ensure the quality of our content. Your unanswered questions can be directed to the 10-Minute University email that is found in your Zoom confirmation email. I'm Priscilla Robinson, and today I'll be sharing some information and hopefully inspiration to create raised garden beds. I'm going to focus on examining a landscaping technique that has been utilized for centuries, raised bed gardening. I have referenced and listed many handouts from our 10-Minute University that I feel will give you excellent research-based information to help you plan, build, plant, and maintain a gorgeous garden. Today, Cheryl will co-host and facilitate the question and answer session following the presentation. Feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box, throughout the presentation, and we'll be monitoring the chat box, and Sean will be posting lots of great links for you to use. So let's go ahead and get started. Today we're going to cover the following topics. We're going to learn about raised beds and their benefits. We're going to learn and interpret criteria for building a raised bed on your site. Not every yard is flat, right? We're going to learn the steps to make an unframed raised bed, gain knowledge of the materials that you can use to make a raised bed, and make sure that they're safe. We're also going to learn about the soil for your new framed bed. And lastly, we're going to have some tips and tricks for extending your growing season, coping with the excess summer heat, some plant choices, and maybe even outsmarting the pests in your raised beds. So raised beds have soil that is higher than the surrounding soil. They're usually small and surrounded by walkways. They're connected to the native soil, and they are a great alternative for yards that have challenges, whether it be the slope or your soil. Raised beds are really versatile and can be planted with vegetables, flowers, berries, or even shrubs. So while you're watching today, think about what your vision is. What are you wanting to plant? Hopefully, you'll see something today to help you get started. And when I'm gardening, I actually enjoy that whole journey, and I expect to hit a few bumps, maybe some detours along the road, but it's all a part of that process, and I just keep going. So raised beds provide a nice blank canvas. The soil conditions surrounding your home may not possess the desirable characteristics for growing flowers and produce. So let's build some raised beds. It's important to know that your raised bed is connected to the native soil. That's the dirt around your home. By adding compost and other soil products to that native soil, you can make it better for your growing conditions. Raised beds can be either framed or unframed. There are lots of benefits to raised beds. Better drainage keeps the roots of your plant healthy. It allows the water and the nutrients dissolved in that water to flow freely around the roots and be absorbed. And that's used for better plant growth, more flowers, more vegetables. The raised beds also help with warming your soil earlier in the season. So that means you can plant a little earlier in the spring and extend it later into the fall. With a better growing environment, you'll enjoy better harvests. Also, a raised bed really allows for easier planting, weeding, and even wheelchair access, so everyone can be gardening. In this photo, you see the smooth ledges on the raised beds provide a place to sit and tend to the flowers, as well as the weeds. Did you know if you have raised beds that are 20 inches or higher, gardeners are more likely to provide close attention to the pests, weeds, and the water needs just because of that easier access. Raised beds provide nice structure. The defined beds make it easier to plan. On the right is an example of a planting app for raised garden beds, or for any garden bed, actually. They're provided by seed companies online, and they're digital, and you can map out the size of your garden, the size of your rows, and it will give you some advice on how many plants to actually plant. I like to keep track of it from year to year because it helps me with my remembering my crop rotations. Location of your garden makes all the difference. Select a location with at least 8 hours of full sun. You can get away with 6 on many crops. A lot of community gardens have great locations with lots of sun, and the beds are already made. So if maybe building a garden bed is not in your future, you can find a nice community garden. Here in the Clackamas County, there's a good variety of community gardens, and I encourage you to pursue that. It's very important to consider your garden location and also the orientation of it, meaning how does it sit on the property, north, south, east, and west. You will find the best results if you orient your garden bed in an east-west orientation, as in the diagram. And then you want to plant your tallest plants on the north side and your shortest plants on the south side. What's that look like? Well, this bed is oriented in an east-west manner, and it's getting the maximum sun exposure. This is intensive gardening. That's another advantage in a raised bed. You can do intensive gardening. It reduces your roots, your weeds. In this one, you'll see the tallest plants like the tomatoes and the pea trellis and the climbing cucumbers are over on the north side, where the lower plants like the mint, the lettuce, and the kale are on the south side. There's actually not enough time in this webinar to go over all the plant choices for your garden bed. Included are excellent resources to help you pick the best vegetables for the season, the size of your garden bed, and your sun exposure. You can plant almost anything in a raised garden bed. However, there are some limiting factors. One is the depth of your garden bed. The other is the overall size of your garden bed. You might have to make some hard decisions what to plant and what not to plant. And then lastly, the sun exposure of your garden bed is definitely a limiting factor. So for a small garden bed, they're not really suitable for really large crops like corn, some tomato varieties, perhaps some squash varieties that really want to grow and wander, unless you're willing to allow them to grow out onto the ground around there. Another limiting factor is if your garden bed is short, if the height is not too tall, then you'll want to use vegetables that have a short or shallow root system, such as peas, herbs, and leafy vegetables. Same things goes for flowers. Some flowers have a very deep root system. Some have a shallow root system. If your garden bed is short, you'll need to find ones with a shallow root system. If you've got a nice tall garden bed, You can handle vegetables that will send down those deep roots, such as tomatoes, broccoli, artichokes. So those are some of the things that you need to think about when you're planning your garden bed or when you're choosing one at a community center. How tall is it? How short is it? An additional benefit of a raised garden bed is to utilize sloped property with terracing beds like the photo here. Take advantage of all the space on your property. Don't let that nice sunny hillside go to waste. Put in some garden beds and terrace them. Okay, so now let's take a look at your big decision. Are you going to build an unframed bed? It may be your budget, your garden location, or your skill set that will help you decide which kind of bed you're going to have. A framed one, or an unframed one, or a framed one. All right, so this is my absolute first attempt at creating a simple raised bed. I had done some reading, some research, and I just went for it. It doesn't have to be glamorous, but it needs to be functional so that you can grow the plants you want. This particular raised bed has a simple wooden frame that defines the edges, and it also helps to keep the weeds and the grass from encroaching into the bed. I was pretty happy with this as my first attempt. So there are steps in planning a simple raised bed, and these steps actually are for unframed as well as framed. You'll want to mark out the perimeter of the garden. You'll want to remove persistent weeds and large rocks. You'll want to turn or fork the area at least 6 inches deep. So even if you're adding a kit that is for a framed bed, you still need to get in and dig up the soil and get the weeds out so that you have a nice growing area. Okay, for an unframed bed, you'll want to mix in 3 or more inches of organic matter. You want to make sure that those beds are marked with stakes and placed at the corners. And then lastly, you'll dig out the walkways and smooth the top. Let's take a look at the next slide. That will really give you a good visual. Here we go. So in our area here, we have clay soil, and it's often a reason for failed crops. So your answer is a raised bed. So I like this schematic by Eric at OSU for creating a raised bed. You select your area, you dig down 6 inches, you add a layer of compost and perhaps a fertilizer. This is a good time for just a even fertilizer with nitrogen. Blood and feather meal are really good options. Then you mix all that more organic material in with that native soil. And then at this point, you add another layer of the native soil. Notice this right here. This is where we've dug out more of the soil in the pathway area, and you put it on top. And then add more organic material. The next step is to work that into the underlying soil. And that can be done with a couple of different tools. My tools of choice for digging that in is this broad fork outlined in white, or the garden spade that's outlined in black. Although this schematic shows a rototiller, the new science is actually encouraging narrow vertical column channels, not the corkscrew action that you get with a rototiller. The science behind this is because we want to preserve the various layers of good microorganisms in that native soil. If you disrupt it too much, then your soil isn't interactive and you lose your balance. Here's what an unframed garden bed looks like in the process. You can see organic material being added here. Now it's starting to change that color. It's looking good. Here's a little trick. This two-step method of digging helps to save your back and your spirit. So what you do is you have your garden bed staked out. You dig down first 3 inches, and then you come back again and go another 3 inches for a total of 6 inches. If you try to go straight down to 6 inches, it's very tiring and you may be discouraged. So try this trick. Another tip is the construction. Once we get into framed beds, it's very important to use screws and blocking in the corners. If you don't, as in the photo on the left, you'll notice that the boards start to warp, they start to push out and fall apart. And once your garden bed is filled with the soil, it's really hard to get back in there and make those repairs. So be sure to remember to use your corner blocking. So here's the good, the bad, and the ugly. On the far left, you've got good construction of the garden beds. Yep, they've got that corner blocking and they've got screws. In the middle, we've got bad construction. They used nails and look how it eventually just pulled apart. And then just maintenance. A lot of people think, well, I've built my garden beds, I'm done. No, it takes maintenance. So be aware when you make a framed garden bed, it's important to check it each spring. Check your corners. Do you need to sink a new screw in there just to give that extra oomph so that your garden bed stays sturdy and growing plants? When establishing a new raised bed, planning and installing a watering system is worth doing at this point. You can put in a permanent drip system, but I garden at a community garden, so I can't install a permanent irrigation system. So in the spring, as you can see on the far left, I have installed soaker hoses, and then I attach, in the middle photo, I attach 2 hoses from my water source, and underneath that box is hiding a little dual timer, and that allows me to have my gardens watered on a regular basis, even when I'm not around. It's important to double check with your community garden whether you're allowed to tap into a hose. So just double check with the rules and regs there. Otherwise, you know, hand watering is a great activity for kids. Here's Eliana helping at her garden, and she loves to water the plants. But your plants are going to need water, so make sure that you plan for this. All right, so be sure to plan for walkways. And some things that you want to be thinking in your head as you plan for walkways are the aesthetics. What look are you looking for? What function are you looking for? And what kind of access do you need to have on these walkways? I've put up a chart here with some pros and cons, and I hope that helps you to sort out what might be a good material or what might not work for you. Plan walkways at least 3 feet wide. Think about those plants filled with vibrant and healthy growing plants. they will spill over and the plants don't understand boundaries and they will encroach on the walkway and it becomes more of an obstacle course than a walkway. Another wonder of the walkways is it reduces compaction, and you've got a designated place to walk, and so do your visitors to the garden, and that helps. Compaction is a soil condition when the soil components lose the necessary air gaps. Remember, we talked about those gaps allow water to get in there. If you're stepping on your garden beds, whether they're raised or framed or unframed, you're going to be losing that fluffiness of the soil. Another thing to think about is smooth path surfaces enable gardeners with mobility challenges, or even maybe a baby stroller. A level pathway of brick, compacted sand, or gravel are best for those with a cane, walker, wheelchair. And I remember when I was babysitting my grandson, Henry, that the garden was my oasis during his nap time. I'd roll the stroller out onto the path, the hard path, and he got fresh air as he napped, and I had time to relax with my favorite pastime, gardening. Another thing is if you're planning to use a wheelbarrow often, your path material needs to warrant that mobility. So it doesn't go too well in very loose gravel, but it might work well on grass, might work well on wood chips that have been laid down nice and flat. So walkways are aesthetics, function, and access. Lastly, I garden all year long in my raised bed. And so I really like the wood chips because it allows me to get there during the wintertime when it's really wet. It's not too muddy. It's pretty easy on the feet. So here are some nice examples of walkways. You've got grass, brick, and even rock. All right, so choosing the materials to build your raised bed may be based, again, on your budget, the aesthetics that you're looking for, the function of that bed, and perhaps even the availability of the materials in your area. And the chart here points out some pros and cons of many materials available in our area. A word of warning, when it comes to repurposing wood or buying wood, please be cautious and be informed. You don't want dangerous chemicals leaching into your soil. Using a 6 mil plastic liner is a good and an immediate solution to create a barrier on any wood that is questionable. Make sure to have the plastic make contact with the wood. And again, don't put the plastic on the bottom of your raised bed. You need contact with the native soil. I really love the photo on the left. I like how those rocks have been nestled into the slope to create a raised garden bed. It's awesome use of natural materials that may have been right there on your property. Concrete blocks are certainly sturdy, and both these materials are safe. Poured concrete is an option. It's pretty expensive, especially if you can't do this handiwork to create the forms, but it's certainly something that is going to be permanent and don't have to worry about any loose screws. The culverts here are another nice material. And notice this gravel walkway that's firmly packed. That's great. These garden beds over here are 36 inches tall. They're nice and high, and they offer lots of options for gardening. Make sure that anything that you're making in cement has effective drainage. And here you can see the gaps between the bricks, the blocks, and these culverts have holes. So there are lots of kits out there. Some are really great. Some have excellent hardware included with them for your corners. They have a variety of materials from wood to vinyl, metal, lots and lots of different kits. So again, think about what you want to grow and try and choose something that's going to suit your gardening needs. This kit is specific for potatoes, and potatoes need to be tended differently with soil and compost added throughout the growing season. So this tall garden bed with a hinge allows for that care and then the harvesting of potatoes. And yeah, growing potatoes may not be the most economically sound crop to grow, but it sure is fun to harvest, and it engages gardeners of all ages. So raised beds do best with a combination of native soil, amended soil products, and then compost, some organic material. It's really important to test your soil for pH. pH is critical for the well-being of your plants, your vegetables, and flowers. A pH of 6.5 is optimum for most vegetables, but some have different needs, so be sure to do your research. Amendments can be added to soil that is not balanced. It's going to be free at our spring garden fair, which is coming up on May 6th and 7th at the Canby Event Center. Please bring a sample in a little baggie, label it with your name, drop it off at the pH testing site, and they will let you know what your pH is and some suggestions on how to amend your soil. It's a great resource right here in our own community, free of charge. Please come to the Spring Garden Fair. So another soil-related issue is very critical to think about is not working your soil too early in the season. That's especially important this spring where it's been very wet and it's been very cool. It's been really cold. So what you want to do is you want to do a soil squeeze test or squeeze test. And all that means is grabbing a scoop of soil, squeezing it real tight. If you see water dripping out between your fingers or it stays in a really tight ball, you need to wait. Again, we're talking about soil structure. By working it when it's very soggy, you disrupt the structure of the soil. However, in the photo on the far left, you see my gloved hand. I've grabbed some soil, and when I opened it, that soil kind of crumbled apart. That's when you want to work your soil. All right. Last soil thing to remember is soil temperature. Plants are sensitive to soil temperature. Some like it cool, some like it warm. So cool crops such as peas and kale can tolerate a soil temperature in the low 40s. But warm crops, or crops that will be planted well after Memorial Day, like tomatoes, squash, and cucumbers, want both warm soil and warm air. There is a wonderful resource chart that talks about air temperature and soil temperature that you can access for your crop needs. It's here at the end of the webinar. Okay, this is a question I get all the time. How much soil do I need in my raised bed? Well, for those of you who forgot your geometry, it's some pretty simple multiplying. You get your overall garden bed measurements, the length, width, and height. You multiply them, length times width times height, for your cubic feet of soil. And on bags of soil, or if you're having soil delivered, you tell them how many cubic feet you want. Now, remember, we talked about incorporating some of that soil into the native soil. So if you want to have extra soil delivered so that you can put your 2 inches of organic material on top of your native soil, then you want to add 2 inches to the overall height of your garden bed. So you can see how it changes. 2.5 feet by 7 feet by 2.2 feet equals 38.5 cubic feet of soil. So those are some calculations that if you are making a new garden bed, you're going to want to do before you go to the garden center. So these arch-shaped hoops are called hoop houses, and they do very well with both framed and unframed raised beds. On the far left, the hoop houses are tension fitted into the sides of the raised beds. So you just place it on each side and then push it down into the soil until it feels secure. The arches should be placed approximately 3 to 4 feet apart, and they provide enough strength to hold row covers, tulle, shade cloth, or even clear plastic sheeting. If you're installing it into just an unframed bed, you will need to pound rebar into the sides of your garden bed or right at the edge of your walkway, and then the PVC pipe or the electrical conduit will fit right over that PVC. So here on the side, this is PVC. They also have an additional support at the top to keep them equal distance apart. Here's electrical conduit, and here is just 9-gauge wire. Again, your budget and your, what you can transport in a car might make a difference. When I bought my electrical conduit hoop house structures, they didn't fit in my car. I had to have my husband come and pick them up and throw them in the back of his truck. Okay, here are my raised beds, and they're easily outfitted with row cover. This promotes warmer soil and protection for young plants, and it's always a treat to take a peek under the row cover. On the left-hand side, you can see my winter garden. I use the row cover on top and then some plastic, and that plastic sheeting just allows a little bit more light energy to get into the plants. Row covers are kept on with a variety of different clips for the electrical conduit right here. These are tube-shaped clips that can be purchased commercially, or you can make your own out of PVC pipe by cutting it in half. That's really time-consuming. Again, what materials you have, your skill set, those things might make a difference in what you choose for your raised bed. All right, I did some research because people say, well, which row cover do I need? So on the far left, this is a lot of information. You can go back over it. There's different weights of the row cover, and those different weights will protect your crops at different temperatures. The pros of row cover are really great. They can help reduce the amount of ultraviolet rays that get to your garden. That's great in the summertime if it's just we're into a really hot period. They can also help keep pests out if they're properly installed. They can protect against wind. Those row covers have been great for my garden this spring because we've had hail just about every other day. So my plants are in great shape. They can protect against birds or a barrier, against insects. And they come in a variety of widths, usually 5, 10, 25. So you'll need to determine how much row cover you need by either the width of your row, if you're doing floating row covers, which lay pretty much flat on your seedlings, or the circumference of the hoops. Hoop houses can deter other pests Pests. On the left, the hoop house is equipped with some netting to keep deer from browsing. And then on the right, that purple netting is premium tulle. It has really small holes. It allows the rainwater to permeate, but it really keeps out those flying pests. And we've been able to keep the white flies out of our broccoli, which were a problem in the past. So tulle is wonderful to use. That happens to be purple because that was what was on sale. We kind of did a little test, and it didn't matter if it was white or purple or red. I think we had burgundy colored. They all grew about the same. So the harsh heat domes that we've experiencing have caught many of us flat-footed. What are we going to do? So this summer, you can be prepared with a variety of shade cloths that will decrease light transmission, and it's based on its rating. You just read what percentage of protection you want. The net is designed for external coverage on shade on hoop houses, on tunnels, and even for your greenhouses. It's really important to allow for a clear flow of air. So opening the ends of your hoop houses so that the air can flow through there. That's another way to keep the heat down and protect your plants. The nets prevent irradiation damage in plants and fruits and reduces heat in greenhouses during those hot days. So these are some options. Other tips for off-season. On the left-hand side, I work at a garden where we produce vegetables for food banks. And one option in the winter is we apply a 4 mil black plastic. In the off-season, it controls weeds. It prevents the pounding and compaction of the soil. Our soil warms up earlier in the spring. One negative is it impedes on gas exchange. So it might have some impact on your microorganisms, though the sides are open on these sides, on either side. And so we haven't had problems, but it is, the science tells us that black plastic will impede gas exchange. On the right-hand side, you can plant cover crops in a raised bed. No reason that you can't do what many of the other farmers are doing nationwide. Daikon radishes are great for soil conditioning, peas and clover, or nitrogen. And then in the spring, make sure to turn it under before the plant flowers and seeds. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of weed problems. When you've growing or building your raised beds, plan for some attachments. So pictured here are supports for raspberry bushes, and the bars will keep them constrained and out of the walkways and flopping over when they start to fruit. A cold frame is another attachment that can be designed and fit into your raised bed. So create a space to plant your own starts. You'll notice that this raised bed has a nice wide space here. That's great for seating. And my daughter utilizes a space behind her garage to grow in a raised bed. The beds are elevated 3 or 4 feet high to gain access to the sun. And then once she had these wonderful beds made, she had lots of vegetables growing. The squirrels discovered them. So her husband is an engineer, and he came up with a way to keep the critters out. So sometimes you just have to persevere to get that harvest. But don't, find a place to grow and do the best you can. The garden bed on the top is up against a building with only access from one side. So you do not want to make your garden beds too wide. 2 feet is sort of the max if you only have access on one side. On the bottom, the raised bed is accessible from all sides. So this raised bed is 6 feet wide because people can usually reach about 3 feet. And on the far right is my granddaughter, Eliana, planting seeds. Look how easily she can just stand at the edge of the raised garden bed, focus on the trench to plant the seeds. A bed that is raised is less likely to be trampled than when there are adequate pathways. So the ultimate benefit for me is harvesting fresh vegetables and flowers to share with my friends, my family, and my community. I suggest that you experiment with unusual varieties, not always accessible at the market, but don't forget to plant some of your favorites. It'll keep you going. And the tips and tricks are science-based. They're not magic. So think about what is your plan, your location, the orientation. Fit it on your site. Account for walkways. What's going to be your watering system? How about how much soil do you need? Also account for building materials and the tools that you'll need to build that. And then finally, some attachments. It's time to write an action plan now. And when writing up an action plan, you want to answer each of these questions with a specific, measurable, and achievable response. Be realistic. So as you progress down the list, be realistic with your budget and your capability. It's okay to start small. Think back to my first raised bed. It was a humble little 3x5 patch that launched my love of raised bed gardening. Here are some of the resources which I have talked about. Again, when you go to cmastergardeners.org, all of these things are available for free. There are also publications that are available at the extension. Each one of these is outstanding to help you be successful. Growing Your Own is one of my go-to publications. I suggest it to all my friends and my grandchildren even have their own copy. They've printed it out. It's fairly hefty. You can just use the online version if you want. And if you're going to plant vegetables, take a look at the table for planting vegetables. It's very thorough with vegetable varieties and planting guidelines. You know, even one of the charts has suggestions. If it's a family of 4, how many tomato plants will I need? How many green beans should I plant? That's important information. And I love the little monthly gardening calendar. It just kind of keeps you on track. You print it out, you can see what's coming up. And as you complete the tasks, you can tick it off and feel good about these. And I think that's about it. The possibilities are waiting. So without much further ado, we're going to go ahead and pull Cheryl in.
Hi, Priscilla.
Hi.
Nice job. And of course, we have lots of questions for you. So let's just get going. This is great. First of all, a couple of people said they find their raised beds dry out. They get a little dry, and I recommend that they read the resource you provided on drip irrigation and just how much they need to irrigate. Do you have any tips you want to share with them on that?
It's really important to have a lot of organic material locked into that. And so that's going to be one of your best bets. Regular watering is better than soaking and letting it dry out. But row covers are actually very effective at helping to keep the moisture in there. It kind of acts as a little roof, a little atmosphere. So if you haven't tried hoop houses, that might be something to help you with your area drying out. Also, you can never go wrong with mulching.
Agreed.
A nice layer of mulch down.
Add more, add more, add more.
Add more, and just lay it on top of there. Laying compost on top can also help.
We have an interesting question here. Yeah, it was a good question, and one that several people asked that were concerned they just weren't getting enough water to their plants. Do you recommend lining your wooden raised beds so that the wood doesn't rot so quickly? Have you ever done that?
I do have a garden bed that is lined with the plastic. Is that what they're talking about?
That is what they're talking about.
Yeah. Also, the type of material that you use, different wood, all woods are not created equal in terms of longevity. Old growth redwood, which I don't recommend anybody going out and harvesting an old growth. That was really wood that would last for centuries. But so different woods last different, perform differently. I think some of that is on my chart. I guess plastic is a good option. Mine are lined in plastic and they are about 8 years old, the ones that I'm using at the community garden, and they're doing pretty well.
That's great. That is great. We did have one question about using wood chips, for your pathways. Is there a wood chip you would recommend over another? Are tannins a problem? Should they worry about that, tannins leaching into things?
I don't know if I have the science behind that. There certainly is going to be some leaching, but so I'm sorry, I don't have that answer particular to tannins. I find that free wood chips are really a good option. So if you have someone who's doing landscaping, or if you're chipping something in your yard, those wood chips are fine. I like it to be a little finer than rougher, just so that I don't get poked as much. So a fine wood chip would be a fine free wood chip would be my go-to.
Perfect. Okay, concerns over pests. So let's address burrowing pests. What's your recommendation on keeping burrowing pests from getting into your raised beds?
Okay, that is something that you do at the on-site. What's the word?
You get going, right?
Yeah. When you're building your raised bed, go ahead and loosen your soil, as we talked, go down about 6 inches. And then you can lay out different metal grates. I would not recommend chicken wire or anything like that. That is going to break down within a year.
Very quickly.
Maybe 2. Sort of like, what do they call it? Hog fencing, that real nice. Really
square, firm square stuff. It won't break down quite so quickly, and it will keep those diggers out.
And, you have to think about the size of the critter that you want to keep out. They're pretty small. So you want to go with an inch, probably underneath. Then you put your raised bed on top of that. So prevention is your best bet. If you do have a pest, there are traps available that you can use. Do not use any of the poisons or smokes or anything like that, because you're growing vegetables. You don't want to do that. I guess if you're growing flowers and you're not going to be eating it, then you could go with some of the other gases that are used.
I just think you should be ultra careful when you're eating what you're growing in those raised beds, that you don't want to contaminate in any way. Of course, they did ask, several people ask about slugs, particularly the folks that have concrete blocks. They can find a lovely little spot there to breed and lay their wonderful eggs and then emerge every year. So they want to know what to do.
Okay. You can go on a little midnight safari to hunt for slugs. Slugs like to come out at night. And so if you have your flashlight, you go down, and if you have seen holes in your plants, that's where I'd start. And just quickly just pick up the slugs and get them out of your garden. So you can look for them at night and pick them up and just remove them. And then there are traps that you can either buy commercially, or you can just get a small saucer. And they happen to like beer. They're not picky about beer. They'll drink any beer. You put a little beer in there and it attracts them. And again, as you said, I would be very cautious about any chemicals that you're adding to your garden bed if you're harvesting on a regular basis.
Perfect. Good answer. And, they're always a problem. And, going on safari at night with a little bucket of soapy water is kind of gratifying, because when you have the soapy water, you can kind of count how many you actually got rid of. Couple people wanted to know, they've had raised beds for a while and they're starting to break down. The wood is starting to rot. What have you renovated any raised beds that you've constructed before? Have you just rebuilt them? What did you do?
I have not done that. Have you done that? Do you have experience with that?
I didn't actually build wooden or stone. Now, stone or rock are not going to have that issue, the wooden raised beds, of course, so that might be a plus for stone or rock. But I just kind of like mounded raised beds, and that's the method that I use. So I never had to do that either. And my thinking was, and a couple people said they had corners that were raising because they probably didn't put screws in all the corners, and so corners are raising up. I think there's probably no easy answer for them.
Yeah.
Probably it's a do-over.
Yeah. I have noticed at my community garden that actually my sideboards are fine. And it is those corners that are starting to rot. And I think that's because the wood is upright and the water's getting in there and slowly breaking those down. We just put some extra screws in this spring. But one thing that you can do is, if you get a small piece of wood, you can slot it between the soil and perhaps that area that is rotting. Mm-hmm. And then you can screw into that new piece of wood. And so that would be a quick fix but
a short-term fix.
Short-term fix, but it would allow you to continue with your gardening.
Exactly. There's one lady that wanted to know, have you ever built your raised beds on a sloped area? She's very anxious to do, but her yard is all sloped, and so she's concerned. So have you had any experience with building a raised bed on a slope? Yeah. So you want to find that sloped area, and does it get enough sun? That's, is it going to be worth your while? If it's a super shady area and you like lettuce and those types of vegetables that are going to do well with a little bit of sun, then it's worth doing. So again, I would measure out your entire sloped area, and then you're going to measure out how big you want to make your garden beds. Again, if you can access them from all sides, those garden beds could be 5 to 6 feet wide, and then as long as the slope permits, and also allowing for walkways. Then you're staked out one garden bed, dig out into the slope, the size of that garden bed. So just, chopping into that side of that garden bed, put that soil to the side, you're going to use it, and then go down and do your next ones. And then if they're going to be framed, if you're going to do unframed, I would still put some sort of wood support on that downside slope to prevent the soil from spilling out on the slope. That sounds like a good formula. Okay. Check the extension. And I did get the couple people that asked that, I gave them the link on building raised beds, and I think that will probably address some of the concerns they have there. Nice. Does row cover keep the aphids off your cabbages at Grow an Extra Row? Do aphids still sneak in there? And do you mostly use row cover to try and control them? or not?
We actually use tulle in our hoop houses, the really fine premium tulle, which I don't even think it's smaller than a 1/16 of an inch. There was one picture of it that I tried to show that does help to keep the aphids out. It definitely keeps the white flies out. It definitely keeps the cabbage moths.
Excellent, because somebody else asked about cabbage moths, so I'm glad you mentioned that. That's
Yeah, so it keeps the cabbage moths out, but you really need to install it properly. That means that the hoops, that material is going all the way from the bottom up and around. It's secured with those bull clips or document clips,
Mhm.
and it goes right down to that ground level. Then on
Keep
the
it tight.
ends, remember your old hospital corners, you want to close that whole area out. So you take your tool and you pull it tight, clip it to the corner, pull the other side, clip it to the corner, and then clip again. They're going to find that hole if you leave it, open. So apply tool and really seal up the ends and take it all the way down to the bottom.
Perfect. And that will answer the same for, there was one individual that really had struggles with squirrels eating her strawberries. And I just said, keep that row cover down tight. Don't let them get their little beaks in there. They will dig. I know they will dig. You'll have to monitor it often, but that's about the only way to keep squirrels out when they're determined.
Another option is, and you're going to have to do it really carefully with strawberry plants, but you can apply cayenne pepper to the soil. And
I've heard
that has proven to keep mammals out, those animals that have taste buds, because they step into it and then their feet actually they start to burn or they
lick it.
Lick it. And so it may not stop them permanently, but you may not be the first choice on their foraging trip.
They can go to the neighbors first, right?
Yeah, but
there was a little bit. Yeah,
with strawberries, that's tough. You're going to have to get it way underneath the leaves. You don't want any cayenne on your strawberries.
No, because that would be a crazy taste, wouldn't it? A couple people were confused about shallow versus tall raised beds. And I apologize if you answered this question because I was answering questions while you were talking. So if you don't mind repeating it, they would probably appreciate it.
Okay, so I think that they're talking about a framed raised bed.
Right.
Yeah.
What's shallow, what's not.
Okay, so I would call 12 inches or smaller shallow. So you've dug into your soil 6 inches, and then you've got another 12 inches on top. That's a total of 18 inches for the entire, plant and root system. So when a raised bed is shallow, you're limited on what crops you're going to want to grow because they're just not going to be able to anchor themselves well. A tomato plant is going to topple over because it's not going to be able to go down deep enough. You might even have a problem with broccoli and other plants that can really get substantial. And I'm always shocked at Grow an Extra Row that some of those broccoli roots are 36 inches. I mean, we are two of us tugging them out. So that would be considered shallow. And then I would say 24 inches to 36 would be a good sized framed raised bed, because remember, you've got 6 inches underneath that, and you're going to be able to grow substantial crops in a bed 24 to 36 inches tall. When you get too tall, it actually is a hindrance. You don't really want to go 4 to 5 feet because then you're reaching up and over and you're not
comfortable. Right.
Yeah.
There was one lady who's just 5 feet tall, she said 5 feet 0. And she wanted a recommendation on the height and the width of her raised bed so she can comfortably have access to it. And so you answered that question really beautifully in your presentation. So I hope she was listening carefully.
You know what? I would measure your reach. How far can you reach? You can make it custom, but probably 4 to 5 feet would definitely be the the
The
maximum.
maximum,
that-
yeah, I would agree. There was one concern, this gentleman has asparagus in his raised bed, and he's wondering how he should manage adding compost and whatnot when he has plants already in that bed. Do you have experience with that?
I do. I have asparagus at one end of my garden bed, one of the garden beds, and that's where I have my perennial herbs and I have my asparagus. And I just keep adding compost on top of that, and I minimize my digging. I still get in there with my garden fork or my garden, and we'll make those vertical channels to promote good drainage. But just, you just do it gingerly. And with asparagus, as much as those roots will wander all over the place, if they start to encroach at another part of your garden where you don't want them, they just need to be redirected, or you can
Retrain those guys.
retrain them.
Last question, because we're getting to time and you've already answered a mountain of questions. Do you use cover crops? That this person is concerned if she puts clover on as a cover crop in her raised beds, even if she tills it in, it's going to just take over. Can you address that?
I have not, but Sherry did a real nice paper on who's part of 10-Minute University on cover crops. And really, they have a lot of benefits, but you have to get that cover crop turned under early in the season, and then it will decompose and actually become nice organic material. There's no guarantees in gardening.
No, there aren't.
We can do the best we can, follow the science, and hopefully be successful in our vegetables and flower beds.
I agree. And that is a wonderful presentation. You answered great questions. And there were many people that had the same question. If you have a question, somebody else probably has it as well, right? Thanks so much, Priscilla, for another informative webinar on raised gardens, tips and tricks. We appreciate it.
Great. And again, I apologize that I couldn't go into super detail about what to plant, but please print out those charts, or take a look at those charts, highlight what looks good to you, and then figure out what action plan you're going to make to be successful.
And a reminder to you that in 2 days, you're going to be getting all the resource list that Priscilla provided, and there's a wealth of information in there that will help you figure out what you want to plant and how.
Yeah, and I just want to do one more little plug.
Sure.
10-Minute University is going to be at the Spring Garden Fair, where 10-Minute University is going to be doing in-person demonstrations on all different topics, from flower container gardening, vegetable gardening, raised beds, making seed tape. There's going to be a lot of fun things to do out at the Spring
March
Garden Fair.
6
So
and 7 is the place to be.
Yep, and bring your kids to Cheryl's Corner. She'll have some fun activities for kids to be to really get the bug for gardening.
I've got a couple things up my sleeve, so please join us.
That's
Thanks,
May
everyone.
6th and 7th.
Okay, thanks, Priscilla.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.